You know what's crazy? We're driving around in cars right now that are smarter than the computers that put men on the moon. But here's the thing. Nobody talks about for every brilliant innovation that made it, there are dozens that crashed and burned harder than a demolition derby on a Saturday night. I've been wrenching on American iron for 2 decades now, and let me tell you, I've seen some wild stuff. Some innovations were so bad, they make you wonder what the engineers were smoking in those design meetings. And today, we're diving into 20 car innovations that absolutely, positively did not stand the test of time. Stick around because number 7 is going to blow your mind. It literally could have blown up your car. And if you've ever wondered why your grandfather refuses to buy anything with too much technology, well, number 14 is probably why. Let's get into it. 1. Swivel seats. The dizzying disaster. Remember when getting in and out of a car was apparently too difficult? Yeah, the automakers thought so too. Back in the 50s and 60s, Chrysler had this brilliant idea. What if the front seats could swivel outward to make entry and exit easier? Sounds great on paper, right? You just open the door, the seat rotates toward you, you sit down, spin yourself forward, and boom, you're driving. The reality? These things were a nightmare. First off, the mechanism was heavy and complicated. It added weight where you didn't need it and gave you one more thing to break. And trust me, they broke. A lot. But here's the kicker. Once people actually used them, they realized something pretty important. The seat would swivel when you didn't want it to. Hit a pothole? Hope you enjoyed that unexpected carnival ride. Heartbreaking? Better hold on, because your seat might just decide it's time to rotate. The whole system got scrapped pretty quickly, and for good reason. Turns out, just sliding into a car the normal way worked just fine for the past 100 years, and didn't require a complicated rotating mechanism that weighed 40 pounds. 2. Automatic seatbelts. The annoying babysitter. Here's one that really gets my blood boiling because I lived through this era. In the late 80s, the government mandated that cars needed either airbags or automatic seatbelts. And because airbags were expensive, a bunch of manufacturers went with these motorized seatbelt contraptions that nobody asked for. You'd open your door, and this belt would automatically slide along a track from the pillar. Then you'd sit down, close the door, and it would slide back, strapping you in whether you liked it or not. Sounds safe, right? Wrong. So wrong. People hated these things with a passion. They were slow, noisy, and awkward. They'd catch on your clothes, your hair, your shoulder. And if you were in a hurry, too bad. That belt's moving at its own pace, buddy. But the real problem? They gave people a false sense of security. Most of these systems only did the shoulder belt automatically. You still had to manually buckle the lap belt, and guess what? Most people didn't bother. So you had folks driving around thinking they were all strapped in when really they were only half secured. The whole thing was such a disaster that by the mid-90s, every manufacturer abandoned them and went with airbags instead. Good riddance. 3. Pop-up headlights. The cool kids who couldn't hang. Now don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved pop-up headlights. They looked incredible. A Corvette C5 with those lights up? A Miata winking at you? Pure automotive poetry. But here's the truth nobody wanted to admit. They were terrible. First problem. Motors. You had 2 electric motors whose only job was to raise and lower your headlights. And, like everything electrical from the 80s and 90s, they failed. Constantly. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a Firebird or a 300ZX driving around with one headlight up and one down, looking like it's perpetually confused. Second problem. Aerodynamics. When those lights popped up, your carefully designed aerodynamic front end became a brick. Your fuel economy would tank, your top speed would drop, and your car would start making wind noise like you left a window cracked. Third problem. Pedestrian safety regulations. Europe and other markets started mandating that cars couldn't have anything that could hurt pedestrians in a collision and a metal headlight popping up at face level. Yeah, that wasn't going to fly. By the mid-2000s, they were gone. And while I miss the style, I don't miss replacing those motors every other year. 4. Talking cars. When your car wouldn't shut up. If you owned a Chrysler product in the early 80s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some genius decided that cars needed to talk to their drivers. Not with warning lights or simple beeps, no. Full sentences in a robotic monotone voice that made HAL 9000 sound warm and friendly. Your door is ajar. Your fuel is low. Please fasten your seatbelt. At first, people thought it was neat, futuristic, like Kit from Knight Rider. But after about 3 days of ownership, that novelty wore off faster than cheap brake pads. The voice was annoying, repetitive, and frankly insulting. We know when a door is open. We can see the light. We don't need a robot voice nagging us like a disappointed mother-in-law every single time we start the car, and the system itself was unreliable. It would malfunction and just keep repeating the same message over and over, or it would tell you things that weren't true. Your engine temperature is high when the engine was stone cold. People disabled these systems so fast that dealers started doing it at the factory. The feature died within a few years, and good riddance. Though I'll admit, modern warning chimes are basically the same thing, just less annoying. 5. Cassette, tape storage in the center console. This one's more funny than tragic, but it perfectly shows how technology moves faster than car design. Throughout the 80s and 90s, practically every car came with these perfectly sized slots in the center console specifically designed to hold cassette tapes. Some cars had fancy spring-loaded mechanisms. Others had little rubber grips. They were everywhere. Problem was, by the late 90s, CDs were taking over. And those cassette holders? Completely useless. CDs didn't fit. They were too wide, too thin, wrong shape entirely. But here's where it gets really good. Manufacturers kept building these cassette holders into brand new cars well into the 2000s. Why? Because the tooling was already paid for, and redesigning a center console costs money. So you'd buy a brand new 2002 sedan, and it would have this vestigial cassette storage that nobody used anymore. It became a weird time capsule, a little monument to dead technology sitting right there in your dashboard. Now, we've got the same problem with CD slots, by the way. But at least those can hold your phone if you turn them sideways. 6. Manual chokes, the morning gamble. Young folks today have no idea how good they've got it. You just turn the key and the car starts. Every time, in any weather. But back in the day, starting a carbureted engine in cold weather was like playing a slot machine. You had to pull this little knob on the dashboard called a choke, which restricted airflow to enrich in the fuel mixture for cold starts. Pull it too much? You'd flood the engine. Not enough? The car would sputter and die. And the sweet spot. That changed based on temperature, humidity, altitude, the phase of the moon, and whether Mercury was in retrograde. You'd sit there in your driveway, pumping the gas pedal, adjusting the choke, praying to whatever automotive gods would listen. Your neighbors would hear you cranking that starter over and over, and they'd know. You were in choke hell. The automatic choke was invented to solve this, but even those were temperamental. It wasn't until fuel injection became standard in the 80s and 90s that this particular nightmare finally ended. Now, computer says you need more fuel, you get more fuel. The computer's never wrong. Well, mostly never wrong. 7. Ford Pinto gas tank, the deadly design flaw. Alright, this is where things get serious, and it's a perfect example of an innovation, or really a cost-cutting measure, that absolutely did not stand the test of time. The Ford Pinto was designed in the early 70s to compete with small imported cars. Ford wanted it cheap, and they wanted it fast. So they made some decisions. Bad decisions. They put the gas tank behind the rear axle with minimal protection. The thinking was it would save space and reduce costs. What it actually did was create a situation where rear-end collisions could rupture the tank and cause fires. And I mean catastrophic fires. The numbers vary depending on who you ask, but dozens of people died because of this design. Ford knew about the problem early on but did a cost-benefit analysis. I'm not making this up, where they calculated it was cheaper to settle lawsuits than to recall and fix the cars. Eventually, public outrage forced recalls and design changes. But the damage was done, literally and figuratively. The Pinto became synonymous with corporate negligence and dangerous car design. This wasn't innovation failing, this was intentional corner-cutting that cost lives. And it changed how we think about automotive safety and corporate responsibility forever. If you're getting value out of this video, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. We're diving deep into automotive history every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. 8. Continental Kit Spare Tires. Style over substance. In the 50s, someone at Lincoln had an idea. What if we took the spare tire and mounted it on the outside of the car, on the back, in this fancy chrome carrier? We'll call it a Continental Kit because it sounds sophisticated. Style-wise, absolutely gorgeous. It made cars look longer, more elegant, more expensive. Practically, complete disaster. First, it made your car significantly longer, which meant parking became a nightmare. You'd think you could fit in a space, then remember, oh right, I've got 3 feet of spare tire sticking out the back. Second, it was exposed to the elements. Rain, snow, road salt, sun damage. Your spare tire was taking all of it, all the time. So when you actually needed it, there was a good chance it was cracked, rotted, or otherwise useless. Third, and this is the big one, rear-end collisions. That spare tire and its carrier would punch through the trunk and into the passenger compartment in an accident. It essentially became a battering ram aimed at anyone in the back seat. The whole Continental Kit thing died out by the early 60s, though you still see them on customs and hot rods today. Because if there's one thing we love in the car community, it's bringing back impractical style choices that look amazing. 9. Vacuum-powered accessories. The unreliable helpers. Before electric motors were cheap and reliable, engineers had to get creative with how to power accessories. And their solution was vacuum pressure from the engine. Windshield wipers, headlight doors, climate control actuators, you name it. If it needed to move, they'd try to run it on vacuum. The problem? Vacuum systems are finicky as all hell. They leak constantly. Rubber hoses get old, brittle, crack. Connections come loose. And when they leak, whatever they're powering stops working right. I can't tell you how many old American cars I've worked on where the windshield wipers would slow down when you accelerated. Why? Because at wide open throttle there's no vacuum in the intake manifold. No vacuum means no power for the wipers. So you're trying to pass someone in the rain and your wipers just give up on life. Headlight covers would stick open or closed. HVAC blend doors would freeze in place. The cruise control would stop working. All because of a tiny leak in a vacuum line somewhere in the rat's nest of hoses under the hood. Electric motors solved all of this. They're reliable, they work at any engine speed, and when they break, at least they break clean. It either works or it doesn't. No weird intermittent failures that drive you insane trying to diagnose. 10. White wall tires, the maintenance nightmare. Look, I love the aesthetic of white wall tires. A pristine '57 Chevy with fresh white walls? That's automotive art right there. But as someone who's actually tried to maintain them? Never again. White walls required constant cleaning. And I mean constant. Every single time you drove the car, brake dust, road grime, and tire dressing from regular tires would contaminate that white rubber. Within a week of cleaning them, they'd be brown again. And the cleaning process. It wasn't just soap and water. You needed special white wall cleaner, stiff brushes, and a whole lot of elbow grease. You'd spend hours scrubbing these things and they'd still never quite look factory fresh. They also yellowed with age and UV exposure. So even if you kept them clean, they'd start looking dingy after a few years. The final nail in the coffin was that they were expensive. Why pay extra for a feature that makes your tires look worse and requires hours of maintenance? By the 70s, they were already on their way out. Now, they're purely a nostalgic choice for show cars and restorations. For daily drivers, Blackwall tires all day, every day. 11. Vent windows, the forgotten luxury. Here's one that actually worked pretty well, but technology moved on and left it behind. Those little triangular windows at the front of the door. Those were vent windows, or wing windows. You could crack them open and direct fresh air right at your face. Before air conditioning became standard, these were a lifesaver. But they had problems. They added complexity and cost to the door construction. They were another thing that could leak when it rained. And they made it easier for thieves to break into your car. Pop that vent window, reach in, unlock the door, and you're in. Once air conditioning became standard in the 70s and 80s, vent windows disappeared fast. Why have a complicated window system when you can just turn on the AC? But I'll tell you what, I miss them. There's something about having that direct airflow that AC just can't replicate. Plus, they were perfect for clearing fog off the windshield in seconds. Some modern cars are bringing back similar concepts with separate quarter-glass vents, but it's not quite the same. 12. Carburetors, the temperamental fuel mixers. I've rebuilt more carburetors than I can count, and let me tell you something. I don't miss them one bit. Carburetors were the standard way to mix air and fuel for decades. And when they worked great. But getting them to work right? That was an art form. They required constant adjustment. Temperature changes? Better adjust the mixture. Altitude change? Adjust again. Humidity different? You guessed it, more adjustments. They'd get dirty, clogged jets, stuck floats, worn throttle shafts. They'd ice up in cold weather. They'd flood. They'd vapor lock in hot weather, and diagnosing what was actually wrong required experience, patience, and sometimes just pure luck. Then fuel injection came along and solved everything. Computer-controlled fuel delivery that automatically adjusts for temperature, altitude, engine load, everything. It just works, every time, in any condition. The last carbureted American car rolled off the line in the early 90s, and nobody mourned them except maybe some die-hard traditionalists who enjoyed the challenge. Give me throttle body injection any day of the week and twice on Sunday. 13. Bench seats. The 3 across fantasy car manufacturers loved to advertise bench seats as allowing 6 passenger seating. 2 up front, 3 in back, plus 1 person in the middle of the front bench. In reality, that front middle seat was punishment. Not a feature. You had the transmission hump cutting into your leg space, you had no armrest, no real seatbelt in older cars, and you were straddling the gear selector. If the driver needed to shift, you better move your legs. And comfort? Forget about it. You were sitting on the flattest, thinnest part of the seat with no support. The final blow came with safety regulations. Once airbags and proper 3-point seatbelts became mandatory, that middle position became basically impossible to make safe and comfortable. Bucket seats with a proper center console became the standard, and, honestly, good riddance. I'd take a comfortable 2-person front seat with storage over a cramped 3-across situation any day. Trucks held on to bench seats longer, but even those are mostly gone now, and I don't know anyone who actually misses sitting in the middle. 14. Early touch screens, the laggy disasters. Before smartphones made touch screens reliable, car manufacturers decided to put them in dashboards, and they were terrible. I'm talking about those early 2000 systems that would freeze, crash, lag, and generally make you want to punch the screen, which you couldn't do because that would break it, and replacing it cost more than a used motorcycle. The screens were resistive, which meant they needed actual pressure to work. You'd be jabbing at the climate control button while driving, looking at the screen instead of the road, getting more frustrated by the second. Response time was measured in geological epochs. Press a button, wait 3 seconds, maybe something happens. Or maybe the system just locked up entirely and you need to pull over and restart the car. And the worst part? Basic functions that used to be simple knobs and buttons were now buried in menu systems. Want to change the temperature? That's 3 screen presses deep. Adjust the fan speed. Hope you can navigate there without looking because you're doing this while driving. Modern touchscreens are better, but I still argue that physical buttons and knobs are superior for anything you need to adjust while driving. There's a reason high-end sports cars are bringing back physical controls. 15. Hideaway windshield wipers. Overcomplicated simplicity. In the 60s and 70s, exposed windshield wipers were apparently offensive to automotive designers. So, they created systems where the wipers would hide below the hood line when not in use. Sounds sleek, right? Cleaner aerodynamics, better styling. In practice, it was a maintenance nightmare. The mechanism required complicated linkages, additional pivot points, and more parts to fail. And fail they did. The hidden area would collect leaves, dirt, and debris. In winter, ice and snow would jam the mechanism. You'd turn on your wipers and nothing would happen. Or worse, something would break trying to lift the frozen wipers out of their hiding spot. Replacing wiper blades went from a 30-second job to a 10-minute ordeal involving special techniques to access the blades. And all of this for what? Slightly better aerodynamics? A hood line that looked 2% cleaner? Most manufacturers abandoned this by the 80s and went back to conventional wipers. Some modern cars still tuck the wipers partially down, but nowhere near the complicated systems of the past. Sometimes the simple solution is the best solution, and windshield wipers are a perfect example. 16. Opera windows, the useless fancy glass. Whoever invented opera windows clearly never sat in the back seat of a car with them. These were those little fixed windows in the C-pillar of coupes and sedans throughout the 70s and 80s. They were supposed to add elegance and give rear passengers more light and visibility. What they actually did was create massive blind spots, make the car look dated within 5 years, and serve absolutely no functional purpose whatsoever. You couldn't open them for ventilation. They didn't improve visibility because they were too small and in the wrong position. They just existed, taking up space that could have been solid metal or larger regular windows. And they made aftermarket window tinting more expensive because now you had extra windows to deal with. The opera window died with the Baroque excess of 70s and 80s styling, and nobody missed it. Modern cars have clean pillar designs that actually prioritize visibility and safety over questionable style choices. Though I'll admit they do look period correct on a restored Mark IV Continental, but that doesn't make them a good idea. 17. Sealed beam headlights. The wasteful standard for decades, American cars used sealed beam headlights. The entire headlight assembly, reflector, bulb, lens, everything, was one sealed unit. When the bulb burned out, you replaced the entire thing, not just a bulb, the whole assembly. This was incredibly wasteful and expensive. A simple bulb failure meant throwing away a perfectly good reflector and lens assembly. They also limited design options. Headlights came in standardized rectangular or round shapes, and that was it. If you wanted different styling, tough luck. Federal regulations required sealed beams. When composite headlights with replaceable bulbs finally became legal in the 80s, it was a revolution. Suddenly, cars could have uniquely shaped headlights that fit the design, and when a bulb died, you just replaced the bulb. Sealed beams stuck around on cheaper cars well into the 90s, but thankfully they're extinct now. Modern LED and HID systems have their own issues, but at least the basic concept of separating the bulb from the housing is sound. 18. Manual wing vents for rear passengers. This is a weird one that existed for maybe 10 years before everyone realized it was pointless. Some cars in the 50s and 60s had these little vent windows in the rear doors, separate from the main window. Rear passengers could adjust them for airflow. The problem? They didn't work very well. The airflow was turbulent and unpredictable. They'd whistle at highway speeds, they'd leak in car washes, and rear passengers, especially kids, would constantly fiddle with them. They also complicated the door structure, added weight, and gave you more things to maintain and potentially break. Once rear air conditioning vents became standard, these disappeared completely. Why have a complicated window vent when you can just pipe conditioned air directly to the rear passengers? It's another case of a solution looking for a problem that was better solved by different technology entirely. 19. Landau tops. Fake convertible confusion. Let me tell you about one of the strangest styling trends in automotive history, the Landau top. These were vinyl roof coverings, often with fake convertible snaps and irons that made your hardtop car look vaguely like a convertible. Except it wasn't a convertible. It was just vinyl glued to your roof. The problems were immediate and severe. The vinyl would trap moisture underneath, causing rust. It would crack and peel from sun exposure, looking terrible within a few years. It made the car hotter inside because vinyl is a great insulator. And they were everywhere in the 70s and 80s. You couldn't escape them. Every personal luxury car, every mid-size sedan, every car marketed to someone over 50. Landau top. The only purpose they served was making your car look dated faster. A car with a vinyl top from 1978 looked ancient by 1985, even if the rest of the car was in good shape. They finally disappeared in the 90s when designers realized that maybe, just maybe, people preferred painted metal roofs that didn't rot the car from the outside in. If you're restoring a vintage car with a Landau top, do yourself a favor. Leave it off unless you're going for absolute period correctness. 20. Hood ornaments. The beautiful hazard. I've saved this one for last because it's both sad and necessary. Hood ornaments used to be works of art. Cadillac's Goddess, Jaguar's Leaping Cat, Mercedes's TriStar, Packard's Cormorant. These were sculptures that turned cars into statements. But they had to go. First, pedestrian safety regulations. Hitting a pedestrian is terrible no matter what, but having a sharp metal spike mounted to your hood makes it significantly worse. European safety standards essentially banned them, and other markets followed. Second, theft. Premium hood ornaments became targets. People would steal them constantly, either as trophies or to sell. Mercedes switched to spring-loaded versions that would retract if someone tried to yank them off, but even that wasn't enough. Third, aerodynamics. As fuel efficiency became important, engineers realized that having a sculpture sticking up in the airflow was costing them measurable MPG. By the 2000s, hood ornaments were essentially extinct on new cars. Some luxury brands moved their emblems to the grille. Others eliminated them entirely. I miss them. They gave cars personality and presence. But I understand why they had to go. Sometimes progress means sacrificing beauty for practicality and safety. So, there you have it. 20 automotive innovations that absolutely did not stand the test of time. Some were dangerous, some were annoying, and some just got replaced by better technology. The thing about the car industry is that it's always evolving. What seems like a brilliant idea today might be laughably obsolete in 20 years. And some of the stuff we think is essential now? Future generations are going to look back and wonder what we were thinking. That's the beauty of it, though. The failures teach us as much as the successes. Every terrible innovation paved the way for something better. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We do this every single week, looking at classic cars, forgotten technology, and the stories behind the machines we love. Drop a comment and let me know what automotive innovation do you think needs to make a comeback? Or what current feature do you think is going to be on this list in 20 years? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.